A billionaire, proud and powerful, thought he had seen it all. But one night he staged a test, pretending to sleep while his black maid cared for his child. What he expected was simple obedience. What he witnessed instead left him frozen, unable to believe his own eyes. It wasn't wealth, status, or power that defined that moment. It was something far deeper, something that exposed his own hidden bias. And once you hear what happened, you'll never look at trust, dignity, or justice the same way again. By day, he was untouchable. A billionaire whose name carried weight in every boardroom, whose fortune could buy almost anything. Behind the gates of his sprawling estate, luxury was routine. Polished marble floors, chandeliers that glistened like stars, and a staff trained to keep everything flawless. To the world, he was powerful, respected, even admired. But beneath the surface, he carried a quiet mistrust, an unspoken belief that not everyone around him was worthy of his confidence. Among his staff was a maid, a black woman who worked tirelessly in the background. She rarely spoke, moving through the mansion with quiet dignity, her focus always on the tasks at hand. To her, this was just a job, long hours, endless cleaning, and the weight of being judged in silence. To him, she was just another employee, someone whose loyalty he doubted but never admitted aloud. That evening, the house was unusually still. His young son was asleep, and the billionaire made a decision that would set everything in motion. He would test her, not with words, but with silence. Pretending to sleep, he placed himself in the shadows, waiting to see what she would do when no one was watching. What he didn't know was that this simple act would uncover a truth far greater than the test itself. The silence of the mansion was heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the air conditioning and the soft ticking of an antique clock. From his reclined chair, the billionaire's eyes remained closed, his breathing slow and even. To anyone else, he looked asleep. But behind those still eyelids, his mind was racing. This was the moment. His test had begun. The maid entered quietly, her footsteps almost weightless against the polished marble. She carried herself with the kind of grace born from years of invisibility, moving as if the walls themselves were more deserving of notice than she was. She approached the child's room with practiced care, pausing to adjust the blanket tucked around the boy's small frame. At first, everything seemed ordinary. She checked the child's breathing, brushed a stray curl from his forehead, and picked up a toy left on the floor. But then, something shifted. Instead of leaving, she sank into the chair beside the bed, her hands clasped together, her shoulders heavy with a weight unseen. She whispered, not words of complaint, not bitterness, but a quiet prayer. Her voice trembled with emotion as she asked for protection, for health, for a future where this little boy would never know the sting of prejudice she endured daily. The billionaire's chest tightened. He had expected negligence, maybe resentment, or even carelessness. But what he saw was devotion. Yet beneath that devotion was a pain he had never noticed before. A pain that came from existing in a world that dismissed her worth because of the color of her skin. As minutes passed, her actions revealed more than any words could. She carefully polished the child's shoes sitting by the bed, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she wanted him to walk into the world with dignity. She smoothed his school uniform with gentle hands, as if preparing him not just for the next day, but for a future where appearances might shield him from judgment. Still pretending to sleep, the billionaire's heart pounded. He was witnessing something he could neither explain nor ignore. Each gesture was a quiet rebellion against the stereotypes he had unconsciously carried. Each act of care was a reminder of the humanity he had failed to see. But just as he began to shift uneasily, another moment stopped him cold. The maid reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, her own child. She held it close for a second, her eyes glistening, before slipping it back as if the world didn't allow her the luxury of remembering. She turned back to his son, her face soft but resolute, and whispered, "I'll protect you, as if you were my own." The billionaire's breath caught. That was the last thing he had expected to hear, and it was only the beginning of what would leave him frozen by the end of the night. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through the vast mansion, but the billionaire didn't move. His eyes were open now, wide, unblinking, his body frozen where he sat. What he had just witnessed wasn't a simple act of kindness. It was a truth that cut deeper than wealth or power. The maid had lingered by his son's bed longer than necessary. She wasn't just tending to him, she was shielding him. With every prayer, every careful gesture, she poured into that boy a love she wasn't free to show her own child, miles away, waiting for her at home. And then came the moment that shattered him. She bent over the sleeping child, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Don't grow up to look at me the way your father does." The words pierced him like glass. He felt exposed, stripped bare in his own home. It wasn't anger he saw in her, it was sorrow. The kind of sorrow that comes from being invisible, from being good enough to serve but never good enough to be seen as equal. For the first time in his life, money couldn't shield him from the weight of his own prejudice. He had set a trap, expecting failure, but what he uncovered was his own guilt staring back at him in the dark. The room seemed smaller, the silence louder. He couldn't unhear her words, couldn't escape the mirror she had held up without even knowing. And as his son stirred in the sheets, safe and oblivious, the billionaire realized this was the night his power meant nothing, because the truth was bigger than him, and what came next would change everything. The billionaire didn't speak that night. He couldn't. His tongue felt heavy, his chest tight, as if the very air of his mansion had turned against him. When morning came, he rose quietly, watching his son's small hand resting peacefully in the same sheets the maid had carefully smoothed the night before. For the first time, he saw it differently, not as privilege, but as protection, bought with another woman's sacrifice. The maid returned to her duties as if nothing had happened, her face calm, her steps steady. She didn't know what he had heard, what he had seen, or how her whispered words had broken something inside him. But he knew. He knew that all his wealth, his power, his control, had blinded him to the humanity that stood in front of him every day. In that silence, he was forced to face an uncomfortable truth. Racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through the assumptions we make, the trust we withhold, the humanity we refuse to see. The night he pretended to sleep, he had hoped to uncover her flaws. Instead, he uncovered his own. And here's the truth. This story isn't just about one man, one maid, or one child. It's about the world we live in, where prejudice often hides behind closed doors, behind polite smiles, behind the illusion of fairness. The question is, how many more moments like this must happen before dignity is given without a test? Because in the end, wealth can buy silence, but it cannot erase truth. And the truth is this: racism doesn't just wound those it targets, it diminishes us all. So ask yourself, if you were tested in silence, what would your actions reveal?